get to what they all did talk about today. Now, something that I wanted to add to the conversation, on top of everything else that you've heard today about Scott Morrison swearing himself in with extra ministries to share the load or take over decision-making when it came to things during the pandemic. It comes from a book which is being written by Simon Benson and also Jeff Chambers from the Australian newspaper. It's called Plagued. It's officially launched tomorrow. Now, something about this book that I didn't hear many people talk about today that's really interesting. You know how when you watch those documentaries that are sort of fly-on-the-wall documentaries where, for whatever reason, a politician, a sporting team, they allow a camera in to follow you through the journey, and in real time they film what happens, and then a couple of years later it all gets put together and we see things as they were happening. Now, I haven't read this book, but apparently the way this book has been put together is not a series of interviews and some journalism in the past couple of weeks. There have been interviews and journalism that have been happening like a fly in the wall, or on the wall, observing and having conversations about all the different decisions that went into how we managed the pandemic. Other stories that came out of this book today that nobody seemed to pay attention to was the fear that was at the heart of decision-making at the federal and state level. We will remember the fear was that up to 150,000 people could die as a result of the pandemic, and largely this was being influenced by, among other things, pictures coming from places like Italy, places like the UK. There's also a great detailed section in the book which is about the day that the Prime Minister made the decision to shut the border to China specifically, and knowing what the concerns were that China would react poorly but also find a way to grow its power by, of course, denying its own actions when it comes to the pandemic. That's a fascinating part of the book. Also, one of the people who is the author of the book spoke on a podcast that the Australian newspaper put out this morning, again, to explain the context of the feeling inside the federal government when all of this was kicking off. That's what this book is about. Imagine a fly-on-the-wall documentary where you see everything as it was, as it happened, not interviews that happened after the game.
And they didn't have enough places at the morgue. The crematoriums were full and you had bodies all over the street. And we saw this also in New York. If an advanced country like the US, UK and others can see their health systems crumble under the pressure, there was a deep concern that that would happen here.
So the concern about morgues and crematoriums came from Italy, and then remember that giant field hospital that was put up in Central Park in New York. That's what they were dealing with. That was what their fear was. But of course, there was one thing that got the media very excited today.
It's extraordinary and unprecedented. The former Prime Minister Scott Morrison was running what Mr Albanese describes as a shadow government.
Scott Morrison, it seems, had learned from lessons of COVID and decided that he would make himself Resources Minister.
An unprecedented move, hoping it'd save Liberal seats on Sydney's North Shore and Central Coast from the Teals and Labor. It didn't.
Coalition MPs and senators are bewildered by the revelations and angered that the power grab was used to try and fix a political problem.
It's extraordinary and unprecedented. What we know is that Scott Morrison secretly assigned himself.
Scott Morrison had himself secretly sworn in as Health and Finance Minister, later extending his clandestine control to other portfolios as well.
Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, is going to have an investigation into all of this. But if nothing else, something that has absolutely been exposed today by this decision is that there is a flaw in our system. The flaw in the system is that a Prime Minister can make a decision like this, the Governor-General can swear that person in, but no one knows about it. That in and of itself is, to me, the biggest concern in all of this. It's one that Philip Khoury wrote about today, and this is one of the many different tentacles that will go in here about whether or not this was the right thing to do. But it's hard to argue about what the right and wrong thing about the decision is if we don't know either the motivation for it or also publicly why we weren't told about it. But make no mistake, there will be the people that will try to turn this into something way crazier than it ever actually was. And of course, you can't just brush it off as extraordinary times require extraordinary measures. But remember the book of whence this comes. Remember the context of whence these revelations come. That this is the fly-on-the-wall observation of how the government, the former government, dealt with this country over the past couple of years. Now, I don't know Whether wires were crossed, people were overruled, we will wait and see. Again, I haven't read the book and I don't know where all of the reporting's going to go. But the central issue for normal people about this is simply, well, why weren't we told? We will eventually find out why that is the case, and we will continue the debate when that happens.